I am very desirous for you to understand the depth of carnality in your own heart and in your own mind, and we've come to that place in our study for this investigation. I'm very desirous that you would know the depth of carnality in your own heart and mind, so that you might know the wonder of the grace and the love of an almighty God. See, if you don't have much to be redeemed from, then the depth of redemption is not all that very deep. See, if you don't have very much to be saved from, then the wonder of the salvation of Jesus is not all that thrilling to you, that it's a token. But see, when you understand the depth of the depravity, when you understand how far down you really are, when you understand the twist that's in the very inner nature of man, when you understand the raw sewage of carnality that flows through the very inner being, and how strong this internal carnal mind really is, then you begin to understand the reality of the greatness of the grace of God and how far Jesus has gone. Can you imagine that Jesus has literally become your sin? Not just the deed that you've done, not just the evil things you've committed, but the very nature of your being. He sucked the internal raw sewage of your carnal mind into himself and literally became that for you. He went to the very depth for you. And when you begin to understand the depth of this internal carnal mind, you begin to understand the wonder of his grace and the marvel of his love for your life. So this is really a significant study. Why haven't we seen it before? Oh, that's easy. Hey, we've been so wrapped up in the outside stuff, the voluntary disobedience stuff. Hey, the guilt that's come to our life revealed to us the external things that we were doing, the lying, the cheating, the stealing, the attitudes, the meanness, all of that kind of stuff. Hey, we saw it. It was so prevalent. But these were all symptoms, you understand? Symptoms of what was really inside of us. Symptoms of the internal depth of the carnal mind that produced it. So now we're going to look at the source. We couldn't see the source because all we could see is the debris that was produced by the source. Now all of the debris has been cleaned out. God in the salvation experience has literally come to our lives and has literally forgiven us of all of our sins and broken the power of sin so that we're no longer slaves to that carnal mind and carnal nature. And hey, we have a deliverance that's greater than anything we've ever imagined in our lives. Freedom for the first time in our living. Life flowing in and out of our being. The rejoicing that takes place in that is overwhelming. As we begin to live a life of freedom over sin, voluntary disobedience against God. So you see, all of this is cleaned up out here, and it's in that kind of cleansing and living in that God can begin to progressively bring us to the awareness of what we are inside. We begin to understand the internal depth of the carnal mind as it begins to war against God. Oh, the depravity of it. Oh, the twist of it. We begin to see the filth of it. And John Wesley says we become horrified when we see it. We see the self-centered carnal mind of our very being, and we just become horrified that we could have this inside. How could we be saved and have this inside? How could we be like this and still have the presence of God? We're horrified at it. We're just absolutely horrified. In fact, he says that we despair that we are even saved. How could we be saved? How could God even be within us? And of course the answer is it's not a voluntary disobedience. Hey, the inner carnal mind, the filth of it is as rotten as it is not a result of our choice. You see, we were born with that. We didn't have any choice in that, so that doesn't occur guilt. But now as he reveals it to us, now as it's being revealed to the depth of our inner mind and in our heart, we begin to understand something beyond is taking place, and that God wants us to deal with this. And now we are brought to the place where it could become a voluntary disobedience. And we could slip back into not responding to God, but beginning to respond to the carnal mind until we would become a slave to the carnal mind and find ourselves dominated by the filth and the rot of our own self-centered carnality. Oh, the awfulness of that. So you see, we are at a crisis moment in our lives, having had this revealed to us. See, this is not some light, superficial thing. This is not some meager little deal. This is the depth, the core, the source, the being of sin. Again, you'll remember that there were three parts to sin. There was the guilt of sin, the power of sin, and the being of sin. Initial sanctification, holiness begun. Salvation dealt with the first two aspects of sin, guilt and power. Now we're looking at the being. Hey, the guilt and the power of sin. The guilt is gone, power is broken, and we begin to realize that there's something down inside. There's a civil war going on. There is a nature within us that is in enmity against God. It wars against all that God desires for our lives. Hey, it's the internal war of the carnal mind. We were born with the nature of sin, the carnal mind, deep within us. And it has been spilling through our lives and has been controlling us until Christ came to save us. And He broke the power of that carnal mind and that sin in our lives. So we're no longer enslaved to it, but oh, the depth of it. We see its influence there, and we despair at its presence. We need to discuss the carnal mind. We want to come to a kind of a definition. We want to spend this class period defining it so that it's crystal clear in your mind what we're really talking about. I remember as a kid growing up in the Holiness Church, hearing preachers wailing away at me about, you got the carnal, son, the carnal. And I would look at myself and say, oh, no, not the carnal. It sounds like some kind of terrible disease or something. I probably do have it because I get everything, but what exactly is this carnal? See, it was so elusive. It was so abstract. I had a difficult time getting a hold of it. It was a theological term. It wasn't very practical in my experience. So I was never really able to nail it against the wall and to deal with it like I wanted to or ought to, because I couldn't get a handle on exactly what I was dealing with. I would come to altars of prayer and weep over the carnal, but what are you weeping over? Well, it's something that's within me that I don't know what to do about it, and I don't know how to handle it, and I don't really know what it is, so I guess God will just have to take care of it, and God is adequate to do that, whether you understand or whether you don't understand. But there needs to be a clarity on exactly what we are dealing with and what we're talking about when we talk about the carnal mind. Again, the Apostle Paul tips us off on what exactly it is. See, he doesn't call it the carnal. Now he talks about, are you not yet carnal? But when he comes to label it, when he speaks of this nature as carnal, he never just says carnal. See, he calls it carnal mind. It's a tip-off. He's telling you something. See, he's telling you that it's not just some elusive thing. It's not just some substance thing that's within you. And I suppose we need to deal with that. Let's start with that. Number one, the carnal mind is not a thing. That seems to be important, doesn't it? The carnal mind is not a thing. In other words, it doesn't have substance. Now, if you want to react and say, well, if it's not a thing, then it isn't even real. Hey, that's not true, because there are all kinds of things in your life that aren't things that you deal with all the time and you believe in and function with. So, you see, it doesn't have to be a thing in order to be real. And again, what we mean by not being a thing is that it does not have substance. In other words, it isn't a concrete thing. It isn't a thing you can nail down, grab a hold of. But if you could get a hold of the carnal mind, and you could grab a hold of it and stab it in the back and rip it open and get inside of it, you would discover that the carnal of the carnal, it does not have substance. Now this is really important, because some of the past training, some of the theological insight that we've gained from our traditional past is that indicated that the carnal mind was a thing. It was like a bad tooth. You go to the dentist and he pulls out that bad tooth and throws it in the trash, and so it's gone. It's eliminated. It's gone. It was a substance that was pulled out of your life. And we've indicated that the carnal was like that. That the carnal was in some manner of a substance that God would reach in and grab a hold of and pull out and eliminate from our lives. This, of course, was given to us through the idea of the term eradication. And there's been great theological battles about this business of eradication. So much so that there's been many people who have said, well, you can't ever have the carnal removed. It just can't be done. So we don't believe in eradication. But again, eradication in our language now has the idea of grabbing a hold of something that has substance and pulling it out. And of course, that was never the intent. In John Wesley's day, this is clear back in the 1500s, they were dealing with this kind of issue. People were criticizing John Wesley, saying you're treating the carnal nature as if it's a thing, a bad truth that can be pulled out. And he was constantly saying, no, I'm not doing that. That's not the intent at all. The carnal mind is a disease that needs the healing of the great physician. He phrased it in those kind of terms. A disease that needs the healing of the great physician. So it is not a substance that we're dealing with. It's not a thing. But again, our past history has brought us to the place where we've looked at it in the past and in our tradition as that which had substance. For instance, we've used illustrations that led us to believe that. For instance, the old-timers used the illustration of the tree. There's the tree of sin that's planted in your life. The tree of sin runs its roots deep into your system, ingraining itself into the very heart and fiber of your makeup and being. The tree of sin. Hey, when you get initially sanctified, saved, lo and behold, God comes and cuts the tree off at the ground level so that the tree of sin is gone from your life. Praise God. All that's going on in the tree of sin has now been removed. But the roots of sin are still there. It's the carnal mind. They're dug deep into the very fiber of your being. And one day God brings His gigantic bulldozer hand down, grabs a hold of those roots of sin, that carnal mind, and yanks them out, and the roots of sin are removed from your life. Now that leads you to think, in that illustration, that of course the carnal mind is a thing. It has substance and its roots that are in your life, and they need to be pulled out. And of course that leaves obvious questions, like how could you ever backslide? How could you ever get that back? In other words, if you begin to disobey God again, how do you get the carnal mind back? How could that happen? And of course the answer to that is God has these cubicles up there in the sky, and one of them has your name on it, and when He pulls your roots out, He sticks it in that cubicle and saves it, and if you backslide, then He replants it. Which is a dumb idea. Very dumb idea. Because, see, we're not dealing with roots. We're not dealing with a bad tooth. Now, we're not here to criticize anybody or to make fun of anybody, because that's not the intent. We're here for clarity. You see, when Wesley, when the holiness movement was on the move, and England was literally swept with the message of holiness, there came to the United States then representatives of that holiness movement. And revival hit the United States back in our beginning days. The brush arbors were strong. Camp meetings were flourishing. Well, the circuit rider was on the scene. There were men like Thomas Coke and Francis Asbury who literally were the circuit riders that blazed the trail for this. And there were many circuit riders, and there were churches planted all over the place, and the message of holiness was sweeping the country. And there was a great revival on the way. So these circuit riders would go from place to place. Well, where did the circuit riders come from? Well, they came from the culture of that hour. See, the educational level of the people of that day was first, second, third grade. Hey, barely able to read. They were farmers. The culture was a farming culture, outdoor farming culture. So you see, when these boys became preachers and became circuit riders and began to blaze the trail of holiness, they used illustrations that communicated to their day. And if you were a farmer with a second grade education, you became a preacher and you wanted to communicate the wonder of holiness to your community, you would come up with an illustration like a tree, the roots, God pulls them out. Hey, all of that would make sense, and it's okay as far as it goes. But you can see that that has created what we have called in the past in this class, folk theology. And of course, folk theology leaves us with inconsistency. It's not a biblical approach. It doesn't tell us from a biblical view what's really going on, and it leaves us hanging, and it leaves us with things that don't make sense and are inconsistent for us. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to go beyond our tradition and beyond our cultural past, and what we're trying to do is get into the depth of the Word of God, discover the holiness of God in its reality, and clear up the folk theology. And of course what we discover is the carnal mind is not a thing. It doesn't have a substance. It's not roots in your system. It's not a bad tooth that can be pulled out. And when we talk about eradication of the carnal mind, we're not talking about a substance that's being removed. Again, the word eradication has had a change in our culture. And if you trace the word eradicate, you will discover it means something different today than it did in days gone by. In days gone by, when you used the word eradicate, it painted one picture for you, but today when you use the word eradicate, it paints another picture for you. See, when you say eradicate today, it leaves you with the impression that something that's there has now been eradicated, removed, taken out, so it has that picture. But see, in days gone by, that wasn't the meaning of the word. So the word has evolved on us. For instance, eradicate in days gone by had the idea that, well, my finger is bent. Yes, I'm going to eradicate it. Which has nothing to do with the removing of anything, has simply to do with the straightening of something. Now, in technical terms, you can say you removed the bent, but it wasn't a substance that you took out. It was simply a straightening that took place. You can talk about eradication in terms of light and darkness. For instance, the room is filled with darkness. Hey, it's pitch black. You can't see anything. Darkness has permeated the depth of the entire room. But it's easily solved because you go over and flip the light on, and lo and behold, there is the darkness has been eradicated. Now, we understand that nothing was removed. Well, the darkness was removed. Well, but it wasn't a substance that was taken out. And if you flip the light off, the darkness is present again. Well, where did it go? Well, you see, is it the fact that darkness is the absence of light? And when light is present, darkness can't exist. So it isn't the removal of something in the technical sense of substance. It is the presence of light. See, what we're dealing with is like that in the spiritual realm. See, carnality is the absence of God. When God is not present, when God is not ruling, when God is not in control, somebody has to be in control. So carnality is the result. So what we're really dealing with in carnality is not a substance, not a thing. It has to do with an attitude. It has to do with a perspective. Again, the Apostle Paul called it the carnal mind, which has to do with the way you think, the way your mind is operating, and therefore produces a perspective for your eyesight. So here is the whole attitude, the view of your being. Well, let's get right down to it. If we're not talking about a substance, something that's within you, what are we talking about? We're talking about an attitude, and it's an attitude of self-centeredness or self-sovereignty. Now, some people have got upset with me and said, well, now wait a minute, self-centeredness is a product of carnality. In other words, you have carnality, and one of the things that comes out of carnality is self-centeredness. So you have envy, you have jealousy, you have self-centeredness, and those are expressions of the carnal mind. Well, if you want to talk that way, I suppose you can. But when you get down into practical reality, the substance, it's not a substance, but the attitude that you're dealing with when you're dealing with the carnal mind is this self-sovereignty idea. And out of self-sovereignty comes selfishness. Out of self-sovereignty comes envy, strife. See, every sin you want to name comes out of this attitude, out of this attitude of self-centeredness. So the practical aspect of the carnal mind, there may be greater aspects of it that we don't know about, but the practical aspect that we're dealing with is this self-sovereignty. See, I've decided to be God. Now, hey, I know I'm not God, you know I'm not God, and if I came into your classroom and said, well, you guys have been praying that God would show up and I'm here, you wouldn't even believe me. In fact, I wouldn't even believe myself. So, hey, we understand that I'm not God. I know I'm not God. I didn't make Mars. I didn't make Jupiter. I didn't make the planets. I'm certainly not in charge of that. In fact, I don't have any desire to be in charge of that. In fact, the whole business of nature and gravity, I don't have time to mess with all that and keep all that in charge. I can't be in charge of all that, so I'm not interested in that. God can be God. I don't give a rip. Let God be God. God, go and be God. I don't care. Except, you see, I've drawn a circle around myself and I've declared myself to be God here. So my self-sovereignty is not everywhere, it's here. It's wherever I am. So I've drawn this circle around myself and declared my self-sovereignty in this place in my life. It shows up in my language. I say stuff like, well, I got my rights. I got my rights. Well, they didn't have any right to treat me like that. No, they didn't have any right to treat me like that. See, it again shows up in my language and the attitude that I express. Well, they didn't have any right to say that about me. Well, I've got seniority here. Well, I've been on the board for all these. Well, I gave the most money for the carpet fund. Well, I ought to get to hold the microphone once in a while. See, it's that attitude. You see that? That's the attitude. Where does that come from? It comes from deep inside. It's not a cultural thing. Every culture has it. Why? Because all cultures have been produced by self-centered men. So you see, the self-centeredness is woven itself into our culture, and we teach each other and we train each other in these practices, in these patterns of self-centeredness. So we're steeped in this thing. We are absolutely steeped in this thing as we get into the overwhelming reality that we are dominated by our own self-sovereignty. We have decided, I have decided, I'm going to be God here. Now that doesn't mean I can't do something nice for somebody else. Sure. But see, when I do something nice for somebody else, it has a hook on the end. I have an interior motive. Hey, see, I'm after something. I want something. I'm trying to, see, there's a hook on the end of this. See, there's a hidden agenda. See, I'm always operating. It isn't that I can't be a nice guy. See, carnality is not just adultery and drugs and alcohol and filth and depravity and sexual perversion. See, it's not just that. See, it can be in the church. It can be dressed up in nice suits. It can preach sermons. It can be very, very religious. See, one thing you find out about carnality, self-centered carnality, is that it's a survivor. If you push it, if you literally push it, and it realizes that for survival it's going to have to be shaped, reshaped, and be remolded, hey, it's quite content with that. See, you can take carnality and take it out of the world, and you can take self-centeredness and bring it into the church, and hey, it'll work like a dog for the church, man. You can applaud it and it'll just go crazy. It'll build the biggest class and preach the hardest sermons, and it'll just sing the greatest songs, and it'll just win all the awards and memorize the scriptures, and see, you can get, it'll sing in the choir, and it'll just go overboard in building religion because it's all about self-centeredness. So you see, the basis of all religion is what? Self-centeredness, because self-centeredness feeds our ego and makes us feel better, and hey, I'm valuable to God, and it makes me have value and worth, and all of that's a part of self-sovereignty and self-centeredness, which is all a religious deal. But see, when you come into Christianity, that's all being confronted, man, because self-sovereignty, oh, the carnal mind, what God is doing is He saves us, and all of the external voluntary disobedience is gone, and then we come to grips with this whole business of self-sovereignty, self-centeredness. Hey, the internal will pitted against God. I want my way, He wants this, I want that. Hey, what am I going to do? And I really want to do what God wants me to do, but I have this war, this battle inside. I just see something's got to happen to me. Now, one thing we discover for sure about this self-sovereignty is the fact that, hey, it cannot be forgiven. This is really important. Well, I'll just ask the Lord to forgive me for my self-centeredness. No, you can't do that. See, He can forgive you for deeds that you do that are wrong, but He can't forgive you for self-centered carnality. See, it's not forgivable. And the reason is because self-centeredness, this carnal mind, it can't be tamed, it can't be harnessed, it can't be redesigned. See, the only thing you can do with carnality is destroy it. Jesus came to destroy sin. And it's the destruction, it's death. That's the whole business of crucifixion. And of course we'll talk more about this. But that's the whole reason for crucifixion, because carnality has to die. Oh, there's beautiful symbolism of it everywhere. You see, you've got the Jesus of the cross. You've got the Jesus Christ of Nazareth, and then you've got the Barabbas, which his name was Jesus Barabbas. So when you study it through, you find out that his name was also Jesus, and it was Barabbas, Jesus Barabbas. So you've got Jesus of Nazareth and Jesus of Barabbas. Is what you've got. And hey, there's a choice. Somebody's got to die, man. Somebody's got to hang on a cross. See, somebody's going to die. It's either going to be Barabbas or it's going to be Jesus of Nazareth. So which is it going to be? Both cannot survive. See, it's down to the line, down to the bottom line, man. Somebody's got to die. There's not room enough in town for Barabbas and for Jesus too. Somebody's got to die. So you're either going to nail Jesus to a tree, or you yourself are going to be nailed to a tree. See, there's not room enough in your life for two. You can't be on the throne and He on the throne at the same time. See, you can't serve two masters, man. And the carnal mind will not give up. See, the carnal mind will not quit. There's only one thing that the carnal mind can experience, and that is it must experience death. You must come to death. Self-centeredness must die. You must be crucified. It cannot be forgiven, see. Self-centeredness must die. So, hey, self-centeredness, this carnal mind is really strong. I recognized, of course, that I had self-centeredness in my life, and so I knew that that wasn't acceptable and shouldn't be. So I went downtown, and I went to an antique shop, and I bought the most beautiful bottle I could find. Expensive, antique, you know, but then I'm worth it, you understand that. So I got this expensive antique bottle, went to the 5 and dime store, and got a cork, and literally put it on top. Yes, okay. Then when I saw that I could seal it properly, I reached out and grabbed a hold of myself, all my self-centeredness, all the carnal mind, and I poked it down in this bottle. And I kept poking it in this bottle, until all of it was in there. Then I put the cork on top, gave it a couple good licks, took the self-centeredness of my life, stuck it right here in my hip pocket, and walked down the street. Everybody looked at me at the church and said, "Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Oh, nice guy. Do anything you want. Do anything for you that you need. Hey, give him." He would give the shirt off his back to you. Hey, oh, he's such a fine Christian. Teaches a class. Hey, tithes his money. So generous to the church. Wonderful, 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 wonderful. I said, yes. Oh, yes, yes, that's me. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. But I began to notice how every now and then in my life I had these explosions. Yeah, and I'd turn around and say, "Oh, good night. Hey, I just blew my cork." Yeah, and the old self-centeredness reached around and grabbed the bottle. "Oh, the cork is off, man." And the old self-centeredness just spilled out everywhere. whoa, hey, this is awful. So I'd reach out, grab a hold of the cork, reach out, grab a hold of self-centeredness, poke it all back down in there, put the cork on, hey, and smooth, and whoa, things would level out in my life for a while. Hey, wonderful, oh, great guy, hey, nice, well, poof, explosion, cork off, hey, up, and grab a hold of self-centeredness, poke back down the bottle, grab the cork, hey, stick it back here in my hip pocket, things would smooth out for a while, and explode, and I just kept having these explosions. Notice how that happens in the church. Everything's going along just fine and peaceful. God's moving. Hey, people are getting saved. The church is growing. Whoa! Explosion! Self-centeredness raises its head. It's everywhere. Oh, we grab a hold of it, put it back in the bottle, put the cork on, smooth things out. Hey, get a new pastor. That'll help. And we again see, and we're going through healing. Yeah, we're having a time of healing. Yeah, we're trying to get over, which means some people that we didn't like anyhow left. And hey, the church begins to grow. Whoa! Explosion! See, we never ever really deal with the problem, which is the self-centeredness. And self-centeredness cannot be tamed. Self-centeredness cannot be cuddled. Hey, you can't correct it. See, you don't grow out of this. It isn't, well, yeah, I'll improve, I'll bring it under control. No, it's like bringing a wild tiger into your living room. Hey, you can watch it. It's okay, but sometime, someplace, somewhere, it's going to get you, man. Sometime, someplace, it's going to bite you, son. Sometime, someplace, it's going to explode all over you, and you are going to be exposed and known, and it's going to devour you. See, you cannot have that in your life. Not one single ounce of self-centered carnality must be allowed to survive. It must come to death. See, it's the only solution. It's the only possibility. That's why Jesus died upon the cross, that we might identify with him in total death, and carnality must be brought to death. This is really severe, strong, but it's the only solution we've got, and it's the provision of Jesus' death for us. Total identification with him until we die in him. So this is what he's called us to. See, you cannot tame the business of self-centeredness. Hey, self-centeredness cannot be allowed to survive. It must come to death. We must deal with it head on. Will you take side with God against yourself? So, what we're proposing to you is that the very heart of self-centeredness is none other than, the very heart of carnality is none other than self-centeredness, self-sovereignty, declaring myself as God. Let's go back to the fall. We've talked about it, and we read it in the scriptures. Well, what is the fall all about? Well, Eve is in the garden, and of course she's being tempted by the devil, who's a beautiful serpent, and he is alluring her to eat of the fruit of that tree. But it's very interesting what the words are that you discover in that text, and maybe it would be good for us to turn to that again, although we've looked at it from before. But you find it in Genesis chapter 3. And in Genesis chapter 3, the whole business of the conversation between the devil and Eve takes place, and the fruit is in the midst of the garden, and God has said, you shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. The whole emphasis is there on death. And then in verse 4, you'll note, chapter 3 of Genesis, that the serpent said to the woman, you shall not surely die. Hey, it was a lie. God just told you that. It's not the truth. Verse 5, for God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be open, get this, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desiring to make one wise, she took of the fruit and ate, and gave to her husband also. See, the temptation was, you will be like God. Hey, you can be God. You can be like God. You know how God is. He's in charge, telling you what to do. Hey, you know, all this time, you have let God be God. God has been God. Hey, God, it's been God's will, God's way, God's this, God's that, God's desires, God's wants, God's life, God's... It's always been God's deal. Hey, Why can't it be your deal? Why don't you be God? Why don't you have your own deal, your own will, your own way, do your own thing? He said, well, forevermore. I've been doing God's will when I could have been doing my will. I've been doing God's way when I could have been doing my way. Hey, what's the deal? So she picked of the fruit to dethrone God and enthrone herself. And of course, passed it on to Adam, and that's become the twist within the nature of man. And that's simplified form, you understand, but that's the basis of what we're dealing with. That we have become self-sovereign. We have become our own God. We dethroned God. We've inflated ourselves. We've taken over, and there's nothing more ridiculous, of course, than a man strutting around acting like he's God when he's not God at all. He's incapable of filling those shoes. See, we're a cartoon caricature of the real thing. We're a Looney Tune of the real deal. Hey, we're a twisted mock image of God himself. And it's carnality. See, we have dethroned God and enthroned ourselves. Well, why didn't I know about this? Well, I've been all wrapped up in the sin on the outside, man, the voluntary disobedience. All that's been so big in my life. But now God has cleansed that away and hey, broken the power of sin, so I'm no longer in the voluntary disobedience business. And now in the progression of this, He's teaching me what's going on inside of me and where all of this came from. So I'm now beginning to look at the source of the spring itself. I'm beginning to see what's producing my life, what the core influence has been all this time, and I'm seeing it's my own self-sovereignty, it's my own will, my own way, my own desire. In fact, I begin to see this even in my Christian experience. Hey, my Christian experience becomes all wrapped up in, oh, my happiness, oh, my joy, oh, my forgiveness of sin, my mansion in the sky, what God's going to do for me. God's going to answer my prayer. I want, name it, claim it, get it, hey, want it, I desire. Come on, God, and the whole Christian experience begins to revolve around me, how I feel, what I want, what God should do for me. See, and He's bringing me to the place where I say, hey, don't you see the core of this thing is all about self-centeredness? That I've been in the center of my life, I must come to death so that Christ literally is at the center of my life. And that He literally becomes the core, letting Him be God of my life. Self-centeredness must come to death. It's an interesting thing to analyze sin and the deeds of sin and see where they come from, what produces them. And you can make a list yourself, and you can go through every single one of them, and every one of them will come back to the same fundamental thing. They all are produced by self-sovereignty. See, the devil never invented anything new. The devil never took something from nothing. He only took that which God made, which was good, right, and proper, and twisted it. Just put the self-centered twist on it. So every sin you want to name is a virtue that's been twisted with self-centeredness. For instance, why does a person lie? Well, a lie is the truth that's been twisted. So at the basis of all lying is truth, just perverted, just twisted, just used for your own, just twisted, see? And why does a person lie? Well, I lie to cover for me, I lie to get from me, I lie to protect me, I lie. So the source of all lying is what? Self-centeredness. So it takes truth and just perverts it and twists it. Take the sin of stealing. Why would I steal from you? Hey, it's not because I'm thinking of you that I steal. It's because I'm thinking of me that I steal your stuff. I want for me. I got to get for me. I want it easier for me. I desire for me. And because of me, I. See, the heart of all sin is S-I-N. See, all of sin revolves around S-I-N. See, that's the heart of all sin. So every sin you want to name is produced by this I, this dominant I, this self-centered carnal mind. Is at the heart and the core of all sin. Take the sin of adultery. Where does adultery come from? Well, you know how we were when we were kids, young people. Hey, we'd run out of gas, of course, in the night hour, and oh my, ran out of gas on a lonely road, of course. Pull over underneath a tree. What else could you do? And hey, moon is shining brightly. Hey, sitting with your girlfriend in the front seat. Hey, might as well not waste the time. Okay, wrap your arm around her. Yeah, and out underneath the moonlight, you say things like, this was the line. We said things like, oh, I love you, I love you, I love you. So come on. Would it have been something if we'd had guts enough to tell the truth? Hey, look your girlfriend right in the eye and say, hey, baby, come on, because I love me. No, see, that wouldn't work. So we don't say that. That wouldn't work. So what we say is, oh, I love you, I love you, I love you, but it isn't the truth, see. It's I love me, I love me, I love me. See, I'm thinking about me, what I want, my desires, my demands, my body drives, my pleasure, my. See, I don't care about you. I care about me. It's all about me. I used to have CBs in my vehicles as we traveled, and I just got so sick of it one day, I just pulled my CB out and gave it to my friend, said, you can have this thing if you want it. You see, this guy came over the CB and said, hey, is there a beaver out there that'll loan me your body for a while? You see, it's the pure expression of self-centeredness. See, I don't care what you look like. I don't care where you're going. I don't care what happens to you. I don't care what has happened to you. I don't care what kind of a person you are. Hey, put a sack over your head. I don't care, man. All I want to do is me, my, I, fulfill my... See, that's self-centered to the core. See, if you love, and I tell teenagers this sometimes, if you can find somebody who doesn't want to use you, who loves you so much that they wouldn't risk you, they wouldn't scar you, they wouldn't use you, they wouldn't abuse you, hey, they wouldn't take advantage of you, no, wouldn't, hey, marry them immediately, man, marry them immediately, because they're 1 in a million. Because you see, that's the heart of the sanctified life. It's all about death to ourselves, where, hey, the whole deal is, oh, how can I be redemptive? How can I pour my life out? How can I give myself up for you? I want to die to myself. See, and we quickly come to the issue deep inside of this self-centered carnal mind, and every sin you want to name spills out of this source which is the carnal mind, the self-centeredness. And again, there isn't any sin you want to name that you can't come back to this fundamental issue of self-centered carnality. Take the sin swearing. Why would I cuss in the name of God? Hey, have I been thinking about Jesus? Oh, I've been in prayer, and as I've been praying, I mashed my thumb and his name just kind of slipped out. No. Hey, you haven't been praying. See, well, why do you swear? Well, you see, it's a tricky thing, because it's an identification of the name of Christ with everything that goes wrong in my life. So I mace my thumb, Jesus Christ. Hey, I stub my toe, Jesus Christ. I have a flat tire, Jesus Christ. And I begin to identify Jesus Christ with every evil, rotten thing, every bad thing, everything that goes wrong in my life. I identify it with Jesus as if he's to blame for it. Hey, I didn't mash my thumb, Jesus Christ. I didn't stub my toe, Jesus Christ. Hey, see, it's a way of letting me off the Jesus Christ. I'm identifying Jesus with all the things that are evil and bad in my life. Of course, all the things that are good in my life, I don't say Jesus Christ. No, because that's me. You know, my talent, my planning, my ability. I got it. I did it. I planned it. See. So the heart of all sin, see, everywhere you go in the sin business, you come back to the being of sin, which is none other than self-centered carnality. It's the heart and the core of all sin in our lives. Self-centered carnality. Hey, the being of sin. Again, there isn't any sin you want to name. You can't. Why would alcoholism, drug addiction? Why? Oh, it gives me moments of relief. I can't stand the way I am, and it satisfies. It gives me ability. It makes me feel me. You see, I'm all wrapped up in. See, I'm not thinking about my kids. I'm not thinking about the babe in my womb. I'm not thinking about, see, it's always I, me, what I feel, I got. See, it's me. It's self-centered carnality. The rot. Oh, think of the force of that in your life. Self-centered, the patterns, how they've been woven into your system. Self-centered carnality. You know who my first tears were for? Hey man, I didn't cry for my mother. You think I cried for my mother? I didn't give a rip about my mother. You know what I cried for? Myself, man. All my tears were about myself. I cried over my empty stomach and my wet pants for years and years and years and years over those two issues, man. It wasn't about my mother. Hey, my mother, nearly died in the hospital giving birth to me. You think I cared? Hey, brought me home. Hey, 3 o'clock in the morning. Woman, up! Move it, move it, move it! You think I cared about her? Oh, Mom, get a good night's sleep. Hey, I'll just lay here. No, get up, woman, move it, move it, move it. Why? Because my whole life revolves around, see, I hit the world. I came into the world this way. I hit the streets this way, all wrapped up in myself. Self-centered carnality. I got to be 3 years of age. I doubled up my fist, went over and socked my sister in the back for taking my toys. Hey, why did I do that? Hey, because I'm full of myself, man. Somebody said, well, you got to share. I don't want to share. Hey, see, I've been this way a long time. This self-centered carnality has been in my life from the very beginning. Hey, I got my dad's car, 16, turned 16, got my dad's car, drove downtown for the first time, pulled right up to the stoplight. Guy pulled right up beside me. He looked at me, I looked at him. He revved his engine, I revved mine. He popped his muffler, I popped mine. Hey, light turned green. I jammed that dude into first. Peeled out, man, beat him to the next stoplight. Why? Nobody's going to get ahead of me. Hey. How far did you get ahead of him? Well, he was right over there and I was right over here. But hey, nobody's gonna, whoa! Why are you that way? The smallest package in the world is a man all wrapped up in himself. See, this is the dominant problem. Hey, you're driving down the street, somebody cuts you off. What happens to you inside? Well, immediately inside there, why do you react that way? What is it with, what's inside of you? Did you ever analyze that? What's inside of you? Why are you that way? Hey, the same thing happens when I don't get my own way. Hey, I wanted it to go this way. It went, My wife says, would you carry out the track? My boss says, would you work overtime for nothing? I don't know why I got these headaches. It's self-centered carnality, man. Now, you can try to curb that. You can say, well, I'm coping with it. I'm not as bad as I used to be. Hey, I'm biting my lip. No, well, at least I don't blow his brains out. Well, at least I didn't hit him. I bit my lip, but I didn't hit him. Come on. We're not talking about coping with that. We're not talking about working your way through that. We're not talking about disciplining yourself out of that. We're not talking about taking cold showers and getting over it. We're not talking about that, man. We're talking about at the inner core of mankind is the being of sin. It's being revealed to us. We are growing in our Christian experience, and we're coming to grips with the fact that, hey, this self-centered carnality is deep within me. Oh, man, it's deep within me. I see it for the rot that it is. I'm abhorred by it. I don't want it. Jesus, is there a solution to this? I don't want one more second with this in my life. It cannot be forgiven. It must come to death. Has God made provision for this? And of course the answer is yes, yes. Glory to God. Yes. Oh, the cross is the answer. The Jesus who's come to indwell you can take care of this. Will you simply respond? Now, up to this time, there's no guilt over this. Hey, you're not responsible for this. You were born with this. But now it's been revealed to you. Now you're seeing what's going on. Now you're seeing the very being of sin, the source of sin in your life, and you're repelled by it. And you respond, and God is calling you, and you respond to Jesus. You respond. See, the whole key is in the response again. Respond to Jesus, and He has the solution. No, He is the solution in your life. Hey, Jesus has a provision. Jesus is the provision for the self-centered carnal mind. He wants to bring you to death. Will you let Him do in your life what He wants to do? Will you respond to Him? Will you totally trust Him in the moment of death? Will you let Him bring you to crucifixion? Will you allow Him to act in your life exactly as He wants to act? Will you allow Him to permeate the depth of your inner heart and be in you exactly what He wants to be? Will you allow Him to do in you what He's dreamed? Would you let His fulfillment take place in your life? Let Him draw you into the fullness of His image. Oh, let Him fill you. Let Him go to the depth of your heart. Let Him permeate you. Oh, see, it's not you getting more of Him. It's you now responding so that He can literally go to the deepest aspects of your heart and bring the application of the power of His Spirit in His life into the deep roots of your very system. Hey, changing your whole perspective. Hey, entering into a second definite crisis experience called entire sanctification. What a Jesus we have.